Some moments in politics don't need a press conference to make headlines. Sometimes, all it takes is one sentence, sharp, surgical, and impossible to ignore. And when that sentence comes from Barack Obama, aimed directly at Ivanka Trump in front of a room full of Washington's most powerful players, you know the world is about to stop and listen. This isn't just another political spat. This is a clash between two legacies, two visions of America, and two people who couldn't be more different if they tried. On one side, you have Ivanka Trump, polished, poised, daughter of a president, businesswoman, advisor, and a woman who has spent years navigating the minefield of political privilege and public scrutiny. On the other side, you have Barack Obama, eloquent, calm, calculating, a man who wielded the presidency with precision and whose words carry weight long after he's left the Oval Office. What happens when these two worlds collide? What happens when Ivanka, emboldened by her father's legacy and her own ambitions, decides to challenge the former president on his own turf? And what happens when Obama, without raising his voice, without breaking a sweat, delivers a response so cutting, so perfectly timed, that it leaves everyone in the room speechless? This is that story. Before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like, and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. Let's rewind to where it all began. The year was 2023, and the political landscape in America was as fractured as it had ever been. The Trump era had left deep scars on both sides of the aisle, and even though Donald Trump was no longer in the White House, his influence and his family's was far from over. Ivanka Trump, once a senior advisor to her father, had stepped back from the daily grind of politics. But she hadn't disappeared, not by a long shot. She had been making moves, quiet, calculated moves, speaking engagements, think tank appearances, policy forums. She was building something, positioning herself as more than just the daughter of a controversial president. She wanted to be taken seriously. She wanted to be seen as a leader in her own right, someone with ideas, someone with vision. And that's what brought her to this particular event, a high-profile gathering in Washington, D.C., focused on the future of American democracy. It was the kind of event that attracted the heavyweights, former presidents, senators, diplomats, thought leaders, journalists. And yes, Barack Obama was there too. The atmosphere was thick, with tension from the start. Everyone knew the history. Everyone knew the bad blood between the Trump family and the Obama legacy. Donald Trump had spent years questioning Obama's birthplace, undermining his presidency, and dismantling his policies piece by piece. Obama, for his part, had remained mostly above the fray, offering only the occasional pointed remark, always delivered with that trademark cool. But tonight was different. Tonight, Ivanka was here, and she had something to say. The panel discussion had been going smoothly enough. The moderator had been guiding the conversation through topics like voting rights, political polarization, and the erosion of public trust in institutions. Ivanka had been participating, offering her thoughts in that carefully measured tone she'd perfected over the years. Never too aggressive, never too passive, always strategic. But then, the conversation shifted. The moderator posed a question about leadership in times of crisis, about accountability, about what it means to serve the American people, rather than personal interests. It was a broad question, the kind that could be answered 100 different ways. Ivanka saw her opening. She leaned forward, her expression serious, her voice steady. She began by praising her father's administration, talking about the economy, the jobs created, the regulations cut, the tax reforms. She spoke about results, about action, about a presidency that didn't apologize for putting America first. And then, she turned her attention to the Obama years. Not directly. Not at first, she was too savvy for that. But the implication was clear. She talked about 8 years of stagnation, about policies that sounded good on paper, but failed in practice, about a leadership style that prioritized optics over outcomes. The room shifted. You could feel it. People glanced at Obama, who was seated just a few chairs down from Ivanka. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just sat there, listening, his expression unreadable. Ivanka kept going. She was building momentum now, confidence growing with every word. She talked about how her father had inherited a mess and turned it around. She talked about how real leadership meant making tough decisions, even when they were unpopular. She talked about how America needed strength, not just eloquence. And then, she made the mistake. She looked directly at Obama and said, "With all due respect, Mr. President, there's a difference between sounding presidential and being presidential." The room went silent. Not the kind of silence where people are waiting for the next point, the kind of silence where everyone is holding their breath, waiting to see what happens next. Ivanka sat back, a slight smile on her face. She thought she'd landed a blow. She thought she'd made her point, drawn her line in the sand, and come out on top. She had no idea what was coming. Obama didn't rush. He didn't snap back with a quick retort. He let the silence linger just long enough for the weight of Ivanka's words to settle in the room. He took a breath, looked down at his notes for a moment, and then looked up, not at Ivanka, but at the audience. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, measured, almost conversational, but every word was a precision strike. "You know," he began, "I've been thinking a lot lately about legacy, about what we leave behind. And I think one of the most important questions we can ask ourselves is this. When we had the opportunity to serve, did we do it for the right reasons? Did we do it to lift others up or to elevate ourselves?" He paused, letting the question hang in the air. "Because here's the thing," he continued. "Anyone can talk about results. Anyone can point to numbers on a spreadsheet or a stock market ticker and say, 'Look what I did.' But leadership, real leadership, isn't just about what you accomplish. It's about how you accomplish it. It's about whether you brought people together or tore them apart. It's about whether you told the truth, even when it was hard, or whether you just told people what they wanted to hear." He still hadn't looked at Ivanka. He was speaking to the room, to the cameras, to history. "And I'll be honest," Obama said, his tone shifting just slightly, a hint of something sharper underneath. "I find it fascinating when people who spent years questioning my citizenship, my legitimacy, my right to even be in the room, suddenly want to lecture me about what it means to be presidential." Now, he looked at Ivanka. The room was frozen. And then, Barack Obama delivered the line that would dominate headlines for days, the line that would be replayed on every news network, dissected on every talk show, shared millions of times across social media. He leaned forward slightly, looked Ivanka straight in the eye, and said, "The difference between you and me, Ivanka, is that I was elected." One sentence, 7 words. And just like that, the entire dynamic of the evening had shifted. Ivanka's face froze. You could see it the moment she realized she'd been outmaneuvered, outclassed, and, quite frankly, humiliated in front of some of the most influential people in the country. She tried to maintain her composure, offering a tight smile, but the damage was done. Obama didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He simply sat back, returned his attention to the moderator, and continued the conversation as if nothing had happened. But everyone in that room knew something had just happened, something significant. The moderator, clearly caught off guard, tried to steer the discussion back to safer territory, but the energy had changed. The rest of the panel felt like an afterthought. People were already composing tweets in their heads, already planning their think pieces, already deciding which side they were on. Because that's what moments like this do. They force you to pick a side. Within minutes, clips of the exchange were circulating online. Within hours, it was trending on every platform. The reactions were swift, passionate, and predictably divided. Obama's supporters were ecstatic. They saw it as a masterclass in political combat, a reminder of why they'd admired him in the first place. He didn't need to yell. He didn't need to insult. He just needed to state a simple, undeniable fact, and let it do the work. Finally, someone put her in her place. One viral tweet read, "You can't buy legitimacy, Ivanka. You have to earn it." Another said, "Obama just reminded everyone why he's one of the greatest orators of our time. Calm, classy, and absolutely devastating." But Trump's supporters saw it differently. To them, Obama's response was condescending, elitist, and proof of everything they'd always believed about him, that he looked down on anyone who didn't fit his worldview. Typical Obama, one commentator wrote. Can't handle the truth, so he hides behind technicalities. Ivanka was right, and he knows it. Another said, she was never elected, but she worked harder in 4 years than he did in 8. Elections don't mean you were effective. The divide was stark, and it reflected the broader chasm in American politics, a chasm that seemed to grow wider with every passing day. But here's the thing about moments like this. They're never really about the moment itself. They're about everything that led up to it, everything that came before, all the history and resentment and unfinished business that finally finds an outlet. To understand why Obama's response hit so hard, you have to understand the history between these two families. You have to understand the years of animosity, the public feuds, the personal attacks. You have to understand that this wasn't just a political disagreement, it was personal. It started long before Donald Trump ever ran for president. It started with the birther conspiracy, that ugly, racist lie that questioned whether Barack Obama was even born in the United States. And Donald Trump was one of its most vocal proponents. For years, Trump demanded that Obama release his birth certificate. He went on television, gave interviews, sent tweets, all questioning the legitimacy of the first black president in American history. It was a campaign rooted in bigotry, designed to undermine and delegitimize, and it worked at least with a certain segment of the population. Obama eventually released his long-form birth certificate, hoping to put the issue to rest. But Trump didn't apologize. He didn't back down. He simply moved on to the next attack, the next controversy, the next opportunity to stay in the spotlight. And Obama didn't forget. How could he? So when Donald Trump won the presidency in 2016, it wasn't just a political loss for Obama's legacy. It was personal. Trump spent the next 4 years systematically dismantling Obama's achievements. The Affordable Care Act, the Paris Climate Agreement, the Iran nuclear deal, DACA. It was a targeted campaign of destruction, and Obama watched it happen, mostly in silence, bound by the tradition that former presidents don't openly criticize their successors. But that silence came at a cost. And every time a member of the Trump family stepped into the public arena, claiming credit, demanding respect, acting as though their power was earned rather than inherited, that cost grew heavier. Ivanka, to her credit, had tried to position herself differently. She'd tried to be the moderate voice, the reasonable one, the bridge builder. But she was still a Trump, and she still benefited from a system that her father had exploited, that her family had profited from, that had given her a platform she never would have had on her own merit. And Obama knew it. Everyone knew it. So, when Ivanka stood up in that room and tried to lecture him about leadership, about results, about what it means to be presidential, Obama didn't see a peer. He saw someone who'd been handed everything and still wanted more. Someone who'd never faced a real election, never put herself on the line, never earned the right to speak with the authority she claimed. And that's why his response was so devastating. Because it was true. The difference between you and me, Ivanka, is that I was elected. It wasn't just a comeback. It was a history lesson, a reminder, a reality check. If you were in Ivanka's position right there, facing that level of public humiliation, what would you have done? Would you have fired back, stayed silent, or handled it differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to know. But let's dig deeper, because this story isn't just about one exchange at one event. It's about something much bigger, something that's been simmering in American politics for years. The question of legitimacy. Who gets to lead? Who gets to speak? Who gets to claim authority? And what do you have to do to earn it? In a democracy, the answer is supposed to be simple. You earn it through the votes of the people. You put yourself out there, you make your case, and you let the public decide. That's the contract. That's the foundation. But in recent years, that foundation has been shaken. We've seen the rise of political dynasties, where names matter more than ideas. We've seen the influence of money, where billionaires can buy their way into the conversation without ever facing voters. We've seen the power of celebrity, where being famous becomes a substitute for being qualified. And the Trump family embodies all of that. Donald Trump was never a traditional politician. He was a businessman, a reality TV star, a brand. And when he won the presidency, he didn't just bring himself into the White House, he brought his entire family. His children became advisors, power brokers, representatives of the United States on the world stage. Ivanka, in particular, occupied a unique position. She had an office in the West Wing. She sat in on meetings with world leaders. She represented the administration at international summits. She wielded influence that most elected officials could only dream of. But she was never elected. She was never vetted by the voters. She was there because of her last name, because of her relationship to the president, because of a system that allowed it. And that bothered a lot of people, not just Democrats, not just Obama supporters, people across the political spectrum who believed that democracy means something, that elections matter, that power should be earned, not inherited. So when Obama said, "The difference between you and me, Ivanka, is that I was elected," he wasn't just putting her in her place. He was making a statement about democracy itself. He was drawing a line between those who earn their authority and those who are simply given it. And that line matters. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Ivanka Trump is smart, capable, and accomplished in her own right. She built businesses, created brands, and navigated one of the most challenging political environments in modern history. But none of that changes the fact that her political power was never legitimized by voters. She never had to knock on doors, never had to convince skeptical constituents, never had to face an opponent in a debate, never had to put her ideas up for public judgment. She got to skip all of that and go straight to the top. And when she tried to claim the same kind of authority as someone who had done all those things, someone like Obama, who fought through primaries, won a grueling general election, and then got reelected, she crossed a line. Obama's response wasn't cruel. It was clarifying. It was a reminder that in a democracy, legitimacy matters. Process matters. Elections matter. And no amount of polish, no amount of preparation, no amount of privilege can replace that. In the days following the exchange, the media had a field day. Cable news networks replayed the clip endlessly, each one framing it through their own ideological lens. On MSNBC, the tone was celebratory. Hosts praised Obama for his composure, his wit, his ability to dismantle an opponent without losing his cool. "This is why we miss him," one anchor said. "He didn't just win that exchange, he reminded us what leadership looks like." Panels of political analysts dissected every word, every pause, every facial expression. They talked about body language, about tone, about the power dynamics at play. They compared it to other famous political put-downs, other moments when a single sentence changed the trajectory of a conversation. On Fox News, the reaction was predictably different. Commentators accused Obama of being petty, of punching down, of refusing to let go of old grievances. Ivanka was making a legitimate point, one host argued, and instead of engaging with the substance, Obama went for a cheap shot. That's not leadership, that's ego. They brought on defenders of the Trump family, people who argued that Ivanka had every right to speak, every right to question Obama's legacy, and that his response proved he couldn't handle criticism. But the most interesting commentary came from those in the middle, from journalists and analysts who saw the exchange as emblematic of something larger. One political scientist wrote a lengthy op-ed arguing that the moment revealed the fundamental tension in modern American politics. The conflict between populism and institutionalism, between outsiders and insiders, between those who see democracy as a tool and those who see it as a sacred process. Obama represents the old guard, the piece read. He believes in norms, in procedures, in the importance of being elected. Ivanka represents the new reality, one where influence is more important than legitimacy, where power can be seized rather than earned, where the rules don't apply if you're bold enough to ignore them. Another commentator framed it as a generational clash, a battle between baby boomers who still believed in the system and millennials who had watched that system fail and were willing to try something different. Ivanka's generation doesn't care about being elected. This analysis argued. They care about making an impact. They care about getting things done. And they're not going to apologize for finding unconventional paths to power. But perhaps the most poignant take came from a historian who placed the exchange in the context of American political history. "This isn't the first time we've had this debate," she wrote. "We had it with the Kennedys. We had it with the Roosevelts. We've always struggled with the question of dynasty, of privilege, of whether family connections should grant political power. What makes this moment different is the stakes. We're not just talking about one family, we're talking about the future of democracy itself." And she was right, because underneath all the hot takes and the partisan bickering, there was a real question being asked. What kind of country do we want to be? Do we want a country where anyone can rise to power, regardless of whether they've been tested by voters? Or do we want a country where elections still mean something, where democratic legitimacy is the foundation of authority? It's a question without an easy answer. And it's a question that the exchange between Ivanka and Obama forced into the spotlight. For days after the event, Ivanka stayed quiet. She didn't tweet, didn't release a statement, didn't appear on any news shows. Her silence was strategic, but it was also telling. Because here's the thing about public humiliation. How you respond defines you. You can lash out, you can retreat, or you can find a way to turn it around. And Ivanka, to her credit, understood that whatever she did next would be scrutinized, analyzed, and judged. When she finally broke her silence, it was through a carefully crafted interview with a friendly outlet. She looked calm, composed, and unbothered, at least on the surface. "I have tremendous respect for President Obama," she began, her tone measured. "I think he's an incredibly talented communicator, and I understand why so many people admire him. But I also think it's important to have honest conversations about policy, about results, about what works and what doesn't." The interviewer pressed her on Obama's response, asking how she felt about being called out in such a public way. Ivanka smiled, a practiced, polished smile. "Look, I knew what I was getting into when I stepped into that room. I knew it wouldn't be easy. But I'm not going to apologize for speaking my mind, for defending my father's legacy, or for pointing out what I believe are legitimate criticisms of the previous administration." She pivoted smoothly, turning the conversation back to policy, back to her own work, back to the message she wanted to send. "At the end of the day," she said, "I'm not interested in playing political games. I'm interested in making a difference. And whether or not I was elected doesn't change the fact that I care deeply about this country and want to see it succeed." It was a solid response. Not perfect, but solid. She didn't grovel, didn't concede, didn't give her critics the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. And for her base, that was enough. But for everyone else, the question lingered. Did she actually believe what she was saying? Or was this just damage control? Because here's the uncomfortable reality. Ivanka had been caught in a trap of her own making. By stepping into the political arena, by claiming authority, by challenging someone like Obama, she had opened herself up to exactly the kind of scrutiny she was now facing. And no amount of media training, no amount of carefully worded statements, could change the fact that Obama had exposed a fundamental weakness in her position. She had never been elected. Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. Do you think Ivanka was right to challenge Obama? Or did she overstep? Let me know. To fully understand why this moment mattered, we need to zoom out and look at the bigger picture. Because this wasn't just about Ivanka and Obama. It was about the state of American democracy, about the fractures in our political system, about the questions we've been avoiding for far too long. Let's start with the basics. America is deeply divided. That's not news. We've been divided for years, maybe decades, and that division has only grown more pronounced in the Trump era. But what's changed is the nature of that division. It's not just about policy anymore. It's not just about taxes or healthcare or foreign policy. It's about identity. It's about who we are as a nation, what we value, what we believe. And nowhere is that divide more visible than in the way we think about leadership. For some Americans, leadership is about results. It's about getting things done, cutting through red tape, making tough decisions, and delivering tangible outcomes. They don't care about process, don't care about norms, don't care about whether someone was elected or appointed or simply showed up. They care about whether things get better. For other Americans, leadership is about legitimacy. It's about earning the trust of the people, following the rules, respecting institutions, and upholding the principles that make democracy work. They believe that how you achieve results matters just as much as the results themselves. And these two worldviews are fundamentally incompatible. That's what made the exchange between Ivanka and Obama so powerful. It wasn't just a personal conflict, it was a clash of philosophies, a battle over what it means to lead in America today. Ivanka represents the first worldview. She sees herself as someone who gets things done, someone who doesn't need a title or an election to make a difference. She believes that her work speaks for itself, that her contributions to her father's administration were valuable, and that she has every right to continue participating in the national conversation. Obama represents the second worldview. He believes in the democratic process, in the importance of being tested by voters, in the idea that authority must be earned, not given. He believes that elections are the cornerstone of legitimacy, and that without them, power is just privilege. And when these two worldviews collided in that room, it was never going to end well for Ivanka. Because here's the harsh truth. In a democracy, elections are supposed to matter. They're supposed to be the mechanism through which we grant authority, through which we hold leaders accountable, through which we ensure that power ultimately rests with the people. When that mechanism breaks down, when people can wield power without ever facing voters, when influence is determined by wealth or family connections, or media-savvy democracy itself is at risk. And a lot of people are starting to realize that. The exchange between Ivanka and Obama became a flashpoint because it crystallized something that many Americans have been feeling for years. A sense that the system is rigged, that the rules don't apply to everyone, that some people get to skip the line while others have to fight for every inch. And whether you agree with Obama's politics or not, whether you think he was a great president or a failed one, there's no denying that he earned his position. He won elections. He convinced millions of people to vote for him, twice. Ivanka didn't. And that's not a judgment on her character or her abilities, it's just a fact. But here's where it gets complicated. Does that mean she shouldn't have a voice? Does that mean she shouldn't be able to participate in political conversations, to advocate for policies she believes in, to use her platform for causes she cares about? Of course not. In a free society, everyone has the right to speak, to engage, to try to make a difference. But there's a difference between having a voice and claiming authority. There's a difference between participating in the conversation and acting as though you're entitled to lead it. And that's the line Ivanka crossed. When she challenged Obama on his leadership, when she implied that her father's administration was superior, when she spoke as though she had the same kind of legitimacy as someone who had actually been elected, she stepped over that line, and Obama called her on it. So what happens now? What's the lasting impact of this exchange, of this moment that captured so much attention and sparked so much debate? In the short term, not much. Ivanka will continue to do what she's always done, building her brand, making strategic appearances, staying relevant. Obama will continue to be Obama, giving speeches, writing books, weighing in on the issues he cares about. But in the long term, this moment will be remembered. It will be studied in political science classes, analyzed in books about the Trump era, referenced whenever we talk about the tension between democracy and privilege. Because it represents something important. It represents a moment when the contradictions at the heart of American politics were laid bare for everyone to see. We say we believe in democracy, but we allow people who've never been elected to wield enormous power. We say we value legitimacy, but we celebrate outsiders who break the rules. We say elections matter, but we treat them as just one path to influence among many. And sooner or later, those contradictions catch up with us. The exchange between Ivanka and Obama was one of those moments when the contradictions became impossible to ignore, when the uncomfortable questions had to be asked, when we had to confront the reality that our system isn't working the way it's supposed to. And that's why it mattered. Not because of who won or lost the exchange, that's subjective, dependent on your politics and your perspective, but because it forced us to think about what we want our democracy to look like, about who we trust to lead us, about what kind of legitimacy we demand from those in power. Those are questions we should have been asking all along. But sometimes it takes a moment like this, a confrontation, a clash, a single sentence that cuts through all the noise to make us pay attention. Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hit you the hardest in this story, and share your thoughts in the comments. As the days turned into weeks, the intensity of the moment began to fade. The news cycle moved on, as it always does. New controversies emerged. New conflicts captured the public's attention. New headlines dominated the discourse. But for those who were paying attention, for those who understood what was really at stake, the impact lingered. Because this wasn't just about Ivanka and Obama. It was about all of us. It was about the choices we make, the leaders we empower, the systems we uphold or allow to crumble. And those choices will define the future. Will we continue down the path where privilege and connections matter more than democratic legitimacy? Or will we recommit ourselves to the principles that are supposed to make democracy work, elections, accountability, the consent of the governed? It's a question that each of us has to answer for ourselves. But it's also a question that we have to answer collectively, as a nation, as a people trying to figure out what kind of country we want to be. The exchange between Ivanka Trump and Barack Obama won't answer that question for us, but it reminded us that the question exists, that it matters, and that we can't keep avoiding it. Here's the thing about moments like this. They reveal who we are, not just the people directly involved, but all of us who watch, who react, who take sides. When Ivanka Trump challenged Barack Obama, she was making a statement about her own legitimacy, her own right to be in the conversation, her own belief that she belonged at the table. And when Obama responded with that single, devastating sentence, he was making a statement, too, about what legitimacy means, about what democracy requires, about the difference between power that's earned and power that's simply taken. And we, as observers, as citizens, as participants in this messy, complicated democratic experiment, we have to decide which statement we agree with. Do we believe that elections are the foundation of political legitimacy? Or do we believe that legitimacy can come from other sources, from accomplishments, from influence, from the ability to make things happen, regardless of how you got there? There's no objectively right answer, but the answer we choose will shape the future of our politics, our institutions, and our country. For Ivanka Trump, this moment was a setback. There's no sugarcoating it. She walked into that room with confidence, with a plan, with a message she wanted to deliver, and she walked out having been publicly diminished by a man who, despite no longer holding office, still commands more respect and authority than she may ever achieve. But she's resilient. She's been through worse, and she's not going anywhere. She'll continue to fight for her place in the political landscape. Continue to advocate for the policies she believes in. Continue to try to build a legacy that's separate from her father's. Whether she'll succeed remains to be seen. For Barack Obama, this moment was a reminder of why he remains one of the most formidable political figures of our time. He didn't need to yell, didn't need to attack, didn't need to engage in the kind of petty squabbling that dominates so much of modern politics. He just needed to state a simple truth and let it do the work. And that's the power of legitimacy. That's the power of having actually earned your place. That's the power of being elected. But here's the deeper truth, the one that goes beyond Ivanka and Obama, beyond any single exchange or moment. Democracy is fragile. It requires constant vigilance, constant effort, constant recommitment to the principles that make it work. And one of those principles is that elections matter, that legitimacy is earned, not inherited. That power must be granted by the people, not simply seized by those who are bold enough or wealthy enough or connected enough to take it. When we forget that principle, when we allow it to erode, we risk losing the very foundation that makes democracy possible. The exchange between Ivanka Trump and Barack Obama was a reminder of that principle. A sharp, uncomfortable, necessary reminder. And whether we learn from it, whether we take it to heart, whether we use it as a catalyst to recommit ourselves to the ideals of democracy, that's up to us. Because moments like this don't change the world on their own. They only change the world if we let them, if we allow them to shift our perspective, challenge our assumptions, and push us towards something better. So as you reflect on this story, as you think about what happened in that room, as you consider the tension between privilege and legitimacy, between power and democracy, ask yourself this: what kind of country do I want to live in? What kind of leaders do I want to follow? And what am I willing to do to protect the principles that make democracy work? Those are the questions that matter. Those are the questions that will determine our future. And those are the questions that this moment, this exchange, this single sentence from Barack Obama forces us to confront. The difference between you and me, Ivanka, is that I was elected. 7 words. 1, truth. And a challenge to all of us to decide what we value, what we believe, and what kind of democracy we want to build. And that's where this story leaves us. Not with easy answers, but with important questions. Questions about power, about legitimacy, about what it means to lead in a democracy. Questions that each of us has to answer for ourselves. So here we are, at the end of this journey through one of the most fascinating political moments in recent memory. A moment that started with a challenge, escalated into a confrontation, and ended with a single sentence that will echo for years to come. Thank you for sticking with me through this entire story. If this deep dive into the clash between Ivanka Trump and Barack Obama resonated with you, if it made you think, if it sparked something inside you, I'd love for you to hit that like button and share this video with others who might find it as compelling as you did. And please, subscribe to Celebrity Chronicles if you haven't already. This is where we unpack the stories that matter, the moments that define our times, the conflicts that reveal who we really are. We're building a community of people who care about understanding the deeper currents beneath the headlines, and I'd be honored to have you as part of it. Most importantly, I want to hear from you. What did this story make you feel? Do you think Ivanka was justified in challenging Obama, or did she overstep? Do you believe elections are still the cornerstone of political legitimacy, or has the world changed in ways that make that idea outdated? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's have a real conversation about what this moment means for all of us, for our democracy, for our future. Because at the end of the day, these stories aren't just about the people in them. They're about us, about the choices we make, the leaders we empower, the values we uphold. And your voice matters in that conversation. So thank you again for being here, for engaging, for caring enough to spend your time on a story like this. Until next time, keep questioning, keep thinking, and keep holding our leaders, all of them, to the standards they deserve. This has been Celebrity Chronicles. I'll see you in the next one.